guys, and welcome back from Carly, head forage monkey and wild things enthusiast at the Herbothecary. Today we have another lockdown edition of my forage food recipes. If you like this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like notification of new videos. February 2021, and while we're all bored crazy indoors, outside here in the north of the UK, the world is coming back to life. So after a quick recharge of my batteries, I am off to find some Ramsons, which is what we're here for today's 8 things I like to do with wild garlic. Now remember, only pick a few leaves out of the outside. Always make sure you have the landowner's permission in order to do so, and avoid places where animals might have sprayed. Always do your own thorough research and be 300% sure before you pick and consume anything. As this is just a recipe video, I won't drone on about the benefits of wild garlic. I will just say that it's as good as garlic with the added benefit of growing in the best environment for it. So I'll say one last goodbye to this glorious, glorious place, and I'll meet you guys back in the kitchen for 8 things that I like to do with wild garlic. But before I get indoors and warm up too much, I'm going to run out and grab the few last ingredients that I like to sneak in with my pesto. As I will be using both butter and buttermilk in my recipes, I decided to whip up some of my own quickly. However, quick it wasn't. After about half an hour of beating with the electric blender, the fats finally started to separate and we had our butter and our buttermilk. Then using a spatula, I separated the two and decanted the buttermilk. Now that that's ready, it's on to our thoroughly washed, dried and examined garlic leaves. I am going to break the thicker ends off and any unopened shoots, as I'm going to use them in a dish later like spring onions. I'm also going to pop a large handful in my dehydrator for another recipe later. On to my first favorite juice, which is a wild garlic pesto. Now I'll be adding some of the usual suspects. We've got some dandelion leaf, some nettle tips, I can only find a few, some herb robert, some plantain, and some of those garlic mustard leaves I found. Also added a handful of wood sorrel for the lemony flavor. Now a pesto recipe normally calls for cheese, however I do not like the taste or the flavor, so we are going to finely chop all our leaves. Now you can do this whole process in a food processor if you like a much finer pesto, however I like mine with some chunk, so I'm just going to pop my leaves like this into a jar. Pesto usually calls for pine nuts, but I am using some almonds that I have, and I'm just going to pop them in my pestle and mortar and crush them up really well. I also had one of those wild garlic cloves, or bulbs I guess, so I'm going to chop that up finely and we'll pop that in as well. In goes our ground almonds. Now I'm also going to use some of the wild mustard seed that I harvested last season to add a peppery flavor to it. Now all our goodies are in our jar. I am going to add a good squeeze of lemon to just go with that flavor of the wood sorrel, and then a healthy amount of oil to cover it and give the nice texture that you want. Stir it up, pop the lid on, give it a good shake and pop it somewhere so that the oils can infuse, and we will move on to the next stage. Now earlier we made our garlic butter and it's kind of softening now, so I am going to chop another handful of the garlic. I'm going to mix them in with this and I will pop it in a mold this time. And then I will grab another handful of leaves and we are going to chop them up finely again, and we are going to turn them into soda bread, or at least the recipe for soda bread I've always used. I have about half a bag of flour in here. Now for soda bread, rather than using yeast, use bicarbonate of soda. So I will add 1 good teaspoon of baking soda to the dry mix and mix that all in. Then we will grab a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, mix that in as well, and then we will work on our wet ingredients. And for this, we will need that buttermilk that we had left over from making our butter. Whisk in a very large egg. Then we are going to add a little bit of honey to this, as I do like the flavor. Then back to the dry ingredients, and we are going to pop our wild garlic straight in with the wild ingredients, give that a good mix around, and then slowly start adding the wet ingredients and giving them a stir around until it starts to come together. Then we are just going to use our hands and mold it and roll it until it's all mixed together and you have a nice shiny, not sticky, but nice doughy consistency. We're going to set the oven to 180 degrees, and this takes anywhere between 25 and 35 minutes to cook, depending on your oven. I popped mine on a pre-floured, well, this is actually the base of a cake pan, but it works perfectly in the oven. I put a few slices in the top, popped it on, and then into the oven for about 28 minutes actually this one took. So now on to the next dish. I popped a couple of handfuls of pasta in to get al dente, and while that's doing its thing, I had a few extra of the bulbs left over, so I am going to keep 2 of these for a dish later, but the others I am going to pop in and pickle them, as it were. So I have half as much water as I have apple cider vinegar. I'm going to turn the water into a salt brine, and then I shall pop all my garlic in. Now, I know this is not the traditional way of pickling. Please research pickling if you'd like to know how to do it properly. I am not using this for preservation. I am using it for taste, and I would normally chop these up and pop them on top of one of the other dishes I'll do later. But as I've run out, I am starting some new ones, and they never last long enough to go through the full canning process anyway. I'm also going to add in some sprigs of rosemary, and then what we need to do now is make sure that all our ingredients are under the water, submerged under the water. So I've just popped in a little plastic cup that pushes everything down, and then I'm going to wrap the top with plastic and elastic band and pop a few holes in. So now on to our soda bread, which has been cooling nicely for the last 20 minutes or so. We have drained our pasta, rinsed it off with cold water, and then poured boiling water over them again to heat them up slightly. I'm going to pop them in my big glass bowl so I can mix them first, and then we are going to add some of that gorgeous pesto we made earlier and give that a good mix in for another dish I love to make with wild garlic. And pop this on a plate, and I'll have it for my lunch today. But just to add that extra touch, I'm going to grab a nice slice of that chunky garlic soda loaf that we made. And this will go lovely with some of the butter we made earlier. Unfortunately, the bread hadn't cooled down quite enough yet, so the butter did melt into it, but it was still absolutely gorgeous. So on the side of my plate there goes, and I'm going to enjoy my lunch, and then I'll be back with the next recipe. Our second from last recipe calls for a flatbread or a pita bread. I guess you could just get one from the shop. However, I do like this opportunity to add some the garlic leaves if you like, or some other seasoning. But I've got a cupful of flour and about 5 grams of yeast. I have a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of sugar, and I'm just going to give that a good stir. We're then going to add some slightly warm water. I find is best. It helps with the rising. However, in a flatbread, the rise isn't really what you're looking for. So I'm going to add the water to that. We'll mix it together until we get a crumbly texture, and then we will start working that with our hands. Remember, if it's too sticky, add more flour. If it's too dry, just add some more water and keep working it until everything is all mixed in. I normally work mine for a good 10 minutes though, possibly because I enjoy playing with it. Once your desired consistency is reached, you can slightly flour a baking tray. I like to just shake mine by hand because I like it thick, more of a thin bread than a pita bread. So I'm just going to stretch this out by hand. You can, of course, use a rolling pin, and we're going to pop that on the side for when we need it and get on with the next part, where we will be using those two garlic bulbs that we had left over from before to make hummus. Now I've rinsed these a couple of times and I'm just taking off the shell as it can make it quite lumpy. I'm going to stick them in my pestle and mortar again rather than using the food processor because I like a more chunky hummus. So once you have a nice creamy consistency to your chickpeas, I just use canned ones this time, it's time to chop up that garlic extra fine, and we are going to chuck that into the mix. Now, most recipes will call for tahini, which is like a sesame seed mix thing, but I'm not a big fan, so I just add a big dollop of oil, mix it all together till it's the right consistency, and then let's get our flatbread. It will probably need flattening out again at this stage, as that yeast would have made it rise. Again, you can grab out a rolling pin if you like yours really flat. I, however, do, like I said, like a little bit of thickness. So I'm just going to pop some oil on my flat grill thingy-mabobby, spread that around, and then I shall toast it on both sides until it's slightly brown. Once nicely browned on both sides, it's time to grab a plate. I like a very thick coating of that beautiful hummus, and then we are going to grab our pesto out and pop some of that on top. And this is definitely one of my favorite lunchtime snacks. If I had some of that pickled garlic ready, I'd pop them on too. Although I forgot to get footage of taking the garlic leaves out of the dehydrator when they were ready, which was about an hour ago. All I did with these was crumble them up. They dried slowly, so they still had their nice green color. Crumbled them up and mixed them with some Himalayan pink sea salt. And as the butter is ready as well, I will just pop that out and wrap that in some greaseproof paper and pop that back in the fridge for later, and on with our final recipe. Now, I am absolutely rubbish at omelettes, but my husband loves them, and as it is Valentine's Day, I thought I'd make him a forage version. So I've got 2 eggs and some of that buttermilk left over. I'm going to use that. You can use milk instead. I've rehydrated some of the jelly ear mushrooms in some warm water, and I am going to just strain them now, and as you see, they're back to being wibbly wobbly. And it's time to prepare our other ingredients. So we're going to start with that wild garlic, and I am going to cut off any of those ends I've missed. As I said in my last recipe, I'm going to be chopping them fine and using them like spring onions. Pop them in with the egg, and now a fine chop or a not so fine chop for the garlic leaves, however you want to have them. And then onto our oyster mushrooms. I like to slice them in fine little strips. Again, you can do it however you like. And we will pop them in as well and move on swiftly to our pan that has been preheating on the stove with a little bit of oil in it. Now, I am really bad at omelettes, so this might turn out to be scrambled egg, but let's give it a go. Pop it in the pan, wait till it's brown and flippable. You can tell by if the edges lift, fold it in half and cook on both sides, and hopefully it won't be a disaster. I'll see you at the end. Now, of course, mine decided to break when I was popping it on the plate, but I am going to fill that little gap with a nice leafy salad with tomatoes and cucumber, and hopefully he won't tell the difference. Thank you guys for coming back for another recipe. Hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon.